Good morning. Welcome to another Simple Truth. Last week we started off looking at the life of Naaman. And I was in 2 Kings chapter 5, and we only got through the first verse, but we looked at the fact that Naaman was a ungodly man who wasn't an Israelite, who was highly favored by God, which pleased his commander. And he also had leprosy. And I challenged you to be careful about who it is that you think that God uses. Too many times we are stereotypical about the types of people that God uses. We think that it's only the highly knowledgeable, those who have degrees, those that man has declared are ready to serve people. And yet in the Old Testament we find person after person that man would have discounted, but God said, no, I want to use that person. We even find that in the life of Jesus. The religious leaders of the time discounted Jesus. They were ready to discard him, to put him off to the side. The only thing that made him relevant to them was the fact that the people loved him and were following him. And so often we look at people and we decide whether or not they're qualified to serve. And the story of Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5 is full of these kind of examples. It's a story that really reiterates and affirms the fact that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called for what he wants them to do. There are a lot of people who are qualified to do what they have called themselves to do. But there's a big difference when you find a person that God has qualified. Now, I find those people are attractive in nature, and I never ask them what their degree is in. I never ask them if they're trained or not. You're just somehow enamored by who they are because God is using them to do something. And this is what happened with Naaman in this story, that his commander was absolutely overwhelmed by him because God was blessing and showing favor upon him. I want to pick up in verse 2, and it says this: Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. Now, once again, I want you to go back to verse 1, because in a few sentences, we've seen the most unlikely of people being used. First of all, it's a leper named Naaman, a commander of a foreign army, and now it's going to be a little servant girl that was carried off for a raid. If we're not careful, we look at what happened to the little girl instead of how God is going to use the little girl. Nothing excuses what we have been through. Nothing makes what we have been through less harsh. It's God, though, who looks down at the harshest of situations and says, I'm going to take that situation and I'm going to use it for something good. Appearing that God is allowing something to happen that you and I would never allow to happen. We would never allow a young girl to be carried off to become the servant of someone, especially not someone that was leading a foreign army, that was ungodly in nature, and had leprosy. You wouldn't sign up to let your child work for someone like that, let alone let them be carried off. An Amber Alert would be put out right away. But somehow God allows all of this to happen to this young girl. We know God says nothing happens in this world that does not go through his sight, that he doesn't somehow allow. We've all gone through those experiences. God only allows to happen to you, he says, that which you're going to be able to withstand. And that's where the rub is. Because you and I think what we can withstand in human terms, God thinks of it with him involved. There's a gap theory. So God looks at this young girl, allows her to be carried off because she's going to play a part in his purpose, in his story. And so if we're not careful, we look at the situation, we evaluate and judge the situation, and we're not open to the fact that God is going to use the situation. He didn't make it happen. It's not the way that he would have done things. He just allowed it to happen. But God decided that he's going to use a servant girl significantly in this story, because it goes on in verse 3 and says this: she said to her mistress, would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. I want you to understand that much like Joseph, this young girl is in the midst of a bad moment, a really bad moment. She has been taken away from her home, from her people, and she is a servant in a world that's not her own, that she wouldn't have chosen. And she has every right to play the victim card like you and I do quite frequently. She has every right to look at the situation, stomp her feet, and start screaming, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. Somebody owes me. Somebody needs to make this right. Somebody needs to fix this. But instead, I want you to understand that a girl who should have hatred, bitterness, anger, disappointment, frustration, and all of these things, she sees the situation with her master, and she talks to the mistress in a most incredible way. She says to the mistress, I wish that my master had access to the prophet. He would heal him. You understand that this is the perfect example of what Jesus tells us when he says, listen, you've heard it said to hate your enemies. I say, love your enemies. Pray for your enemies. This is what this looks like. I often say in the New Testament we find the principles, and then we go to the Old Testament, we see how it was played out. Here it is. God hasn't changed. We're to love our enemies. We're to pray for our enemies. And this is exactly what's happening in this situation. We have this young girl who looks upon a situation where she should have had hatred and anger and every right to say, I hope you die. You got this disease because you deserved this disease. Instead, she looks and wishes that she could play a part in it. She actually does play a part in it by saying, listen, I wish that my master would know of this prophet, would be around this prophet who would heal him. When's the last time that you did that? When's the last time that rather than heaping judgment, rather than saying or acting out the words, you deserve this, you actually had compassion upon somebody who maybe even was lording it over you? Maybe you serve somebody by having compassion, by having mercy on them, and really saying, man, I wish this person knew my God. Because if they knew my God, they would know these things. So maybe rather than going to work and being frustrated and disappointed by everybody, we start looking at them like this servant girl did. Carried away, not because she wanted to be. She chose to serve. And she chose to serve in a way that would bring healing to the family she was serving. Listen, there's no evidence in the story that if she says this and he gets healed, she goes home. There's no evidence that the response to this is going to be going to benefit her and her being, again, free. So again, too many times we offer information, but it's with the idea that we're going to benefit from, we're going to get something from it. And so I want you to think about this as we sign off today. I want you to think about the simplicity of this truth. That is there somebody in your life that rather than having hatred for what you legitimately have gone through, what they have put you through, what they have taken you away from, what they have taken from you, rather than having a you deserve to die with this disease attitude, you had the heart of this servant's girl that you wished. I want to read that one more time to you. It says, what would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Who around you today needs to be cured? Who around you today needs what you have, the hope that you have? This is a girl that had freedom. It was taken away from her and she had to serve. But she took the principles of that freedom and used them in her servanthood. What if you took the principles that you have, the freedom that God has given you, and you used them, you chose to serve others today with them? Join me again next week for another simple truth as we continue on in this story of Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5. Read ahead. Read the story again. Maybe you've read it several times. Read it one more time and begin to look at it from the aspect of simple truths that you could pull out of it.